Hi everyone, welcome to the community call. We'll just wait for a couple more minutes in case other people join, and then we'll begin. Okay, so meanwhile, we always begin this call with the introduction of our newest members. So is there anyone on the call who is attending our community call for the first time? Even if you have attended any other calls throughout the week, feel free to introduce yourself on this one. We have a lot of new members here. From what I can see, Hitesh, is this your first community call with us?
No, I've been here previously.
Okay, great. So, anyone else who is attending this call for the first time?
Nice. If that's the case, everyone knows it's time to record your name in the attendees list. It's also time to drop in any topics that you might have. There are a couple lined up for today. I think the first up actually will be a bit juicy. The context there is Meshery. I should probably note that. Does anyone have any topics? Except Mario, you had an announcement you'd like to make.
Which one?
Oh, well, I don't want to steal the thunder, but
oh yeah. I'm just, really excited about this stuff. So every meeting I join, I just put my glasses, put them on, and I just turn my camera and just say greetings from the metaverse. It's lame, but it's really cool.
Oh wow!
I should consider getting one.
Yeah, and educate me really quick. Is that
like a VR headset?
Yeah, but can you? Is it? What all can you? So games or like what all else can you do? Could you join a Zoom on something like that or?
Well, they're working on this beta version of Horizon Workroom. So it's like a Facebook or Meta app. So I already tried it. You can connect your computer and you could get like virtual, so you remote connect into your computer, and then you have this virtual space. Then you get your monitors up virtually, you can move them around. Pretty much like what we already do, but just a bit more immersive.
Sure.
And you can invite people to join your room. So then you would see their virtual avatar. Just
nice.
Interact.
So you get to become a member of like the pre-crimes unit, like in Minority Report. Sort of,
oh yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah. Nice. That's cool. It's great.
Yep, a lot of other stuff, but it's still like a work in progress. But it's neat to look at the future,
Yeah, I swear I wasn't having any bad thoughts. I didn't contemplate murdering anyone today, so don't.
Lucky us. Yeah, that's all. I'm still looking into the end-to-end test, but maybe I can just take that offline through Slack.
Hey, something else we might want to do on the community calls is potentially, well, bring up any unaddressed, like open questions on Discuss. I'll go take a look and see if we've got outstanding items that we might be able to address verbally. Back to Devapriya and
Yeah, so today we have all familiar faces with us in the call, no newcomers. So I think we can start off with the first item. Ashish, would you like to take over here?
Is my audio okay today?
Yep, it's fine.
Lee, is it fine for you as well?
I'm turning up my volume now. It's clear. Was it? Yeah, but slightly lower volume, but it's clear. It's good.
Okay, well, I'll try to talk louder if that does anything. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Okay. So, assuming my screen is visible. So recently a pull request was merged and the feature that was introduced was managing multiple contexts. So managing multiple clusters from Meshery. Now, I will go over what are the caveats of it, what are the things that are still required from the UI, and what are we doing at the backend, what has changed, and all in all. So the default behavior previously it was that you upload a kube config inside of the settings page, you upload a kube config here. And when you upload a kube config, inside of your kube config, you have something known as a current cluster, current context. Wait a minute, my pop-up has. Okay, yeah. So something known as current context. So whenever you apply any operation from, let's say you from lifecycle, or maybe you deploy a pattern or perform any operation on a cluster, that cluster is by default the current context inside of your kube config. Now the support that was added was to make sure that what if you have, let's say 11 contexts now, and because kube config only supports one of them being a current context, because the client go supports one context at a time, so you can only perform one operation. Basically you can only perform operation on one cluster at a time, so that's why you have only one cluster as current context. If you want to switch, there are commands like kubectl config, and then use context and all, and you have to keep changing context and do that. Now the default behavior right now, the default behavior before this PR was to do exactly how kubectl was doing it, perform the operation on the current context. But inside right now, I have inside of my kube config, I have two connected clusters, minikube1, minikube and minikube2, and so the extra thing that has been added is that you can have multiple contexts. And if I go over to the endpoint, I guess it was API system Kubernetes. Yeah, it was this one. So here I have two contexts. One of them is minikube2 and one of them is minikube. And this data is used over here. So you can see minikube2 and minikube. By default, as you can see, minikube2 is checked because in my kube config, that is because that is set as actually when you load a kube config, the current there are two current contexts here. First is the one in the kube config and the other is the one with Meshery. So when you load a kube config, the default one, the current context inside of the kube config becomes the current context of here in Meshery. So that means that whenever you apply any operation, because we want to be backwards compatible, so we don't want to break everything, all our existing APIs, and all our existing APIs are single cluster by default. So they don't specify what contexts to act upon. So what to do in that case? So in that case, we just use the default context. So for example, in this case, it's minikube2. Now, what extra thing that has been added is that if you select any number of contexts from here, let's say I had 10 contexts here and I select, let's say minikube2 and then I select minikube1. There is extra thing that is needed to be added on the UI side. The thing is that inside of there should be a query parameter. Any API that has anything to do with the basically any API that has anything to do with the Kubernetes cluster should have, whenever you call that API, there should be a query parameter known as contexts, and there you provide which particular context you want to apply that operation on. If there is no query parameter named as contexts, by default that would be applied on your current context, which in this case is minikube2. And if you give it basically, if you let's say in this case I checked minikube2 and minikube, what the UI should do, which it it is not doing right now. The UI, it's not a big change. The UI can do it pretty easily. So Aditya, maybe you can take a note of it. The thing that is needed to be added here is that when I click on these two things at the UI side, whenever you send an API call, you attach that this data in the query parameter context. So because we have a middleware there in our backend, whose job is to take all the context from that query parameter and insert it there. Insert basically means that now every API endpoint can deal with that data differently, which basically means that now someone might have a question about are we applying the operation sequentially or parallelly? Well, it's not hard coded anywhere, because every API gets these active contexts as well as this current context. So it is up to the API how it wants to handle these things. Right now, the pattern deploy endpoint, it does it parallelly. Basically, but we're not making use of that, because right now, when I actually deploy the pattern, we are not, let's say I select these two things, this is not being persisted, and I'm not actually sending these things in the query parameter. That things need to be changed on the UI. Still, I can demo. So if you don't select anything, and you like if I, let's say, select these two things, and if I just reload the page because I didn't select anything, now my minikube2 would be checked because that is my current context. Okay, so now if I, let's say, go over any particular pattern, and this is a basic Istio installation. Profile is default, so Istio pod and ingress gateway. And if I look at my, okay, so my current context here is minikube2. So I will quickly switch over to minikube2 from my kubectl as well. So right now, as you can see, there is no Istio pod over here. So let's say I selected a minikube2 from here, and now I want to install Istio in that particular cluster. So I click deploy, and okay, now my Istio pod came up, and also my ingress pod came up as well. Now, what should happen right now, this thing needs to be changed in the UI, that if I unclick this and I click this, you need to change current context on the fly from here by sending a request onto an endpoint which already exists, /API/ you can go ping me on Slack, or I'll in the notes in the chat, I'll go over what the exact endpoint is. But when I select minikube here, what should happen is that this should be set as current context. Or if there is no, okay, now I can talk about what is current context and what is active context after I go over the demo. Now let's say I go over my settings page, and I select let's say minikube as my current context. Now any operation that would be applied in the minikube cluster. So if I go look what are the pods running in my minikube cluster, there is no Istio pod again. Now if I take my Istio install and I deploy it, okay, I so here it is. I am seeing my Istio pods. There are few things that are needed to be added here, which we will do iteratively. Anyone has any questions?
I do. Just a couple of clarifications. I mean, one, it may not be worth describing the differences between default, current, and active contexts. Actually, it's a bit confusing. If that's temporary behavior and something that will be changed shortly, then maybe that's
Okay.
only confusing.
The reason we still have, okay, so one of the arguments can be, why don't we have a current context? We don't tell for example, we know what current context is. Let's say the user wants to apply something on two clusters. So what we are going to do is we will iteratively select each of these contexts as current context. You can imagine two separate stacks, and in each stack, that particular context is the current context, because client Go only supports one context at a time. So the user doesn't need to know about what current context is. He just selects these particular things, and everything that happens in the selected context. Yes, that is the thing that we want to tend towards. But if that becomes the default behavior right now, all the APIs would break. So we need to first slowly make changes. That's why I said any API endpoint, basically anything from the UI as well as Meshery CTL, anything that is a client of Meshery, any operation that has anything to do with the operation on a cluster, on a Kubernetes cluster, should pass which particular context it wants to act upon. If it does not, what we want to fall back to the, as of now at least, we want to fall back to the default behavior, that is to apply that on the current context. If we take that logic out, that okay, there is no current context for now, we'll have to go over and change all the, basically that would be a breaking change. And the better way would be to first change the all the, basically to change the clients to adhere to a particular kind of rule, and then slowly get rid of that current context in general. Dropping the current context now would not be backwards compatible. That's what.
And when the design was written, there was a request to either have a kind of a token cluster, like a cluster with ID 1 or something like that, that represented all available clusters, such that you could send, someone could send a request that, or rather, Meshery server could receive a request with a single reserved context identifier that indicated any available cluster that Meshery is in communication with. It should, invoke that operation against them. Is there such a construct now?
No.
Okay. It sounds like of the state of the pull request that was merged, the other aspect of the initial design maybe wasn't completed either. And that was that maybe it is. So on the, what you're highlighting, I think, is that in the endpoints in Golang for REST anyway, and we should talk about GraphQL, that all of them have been augmented to accept essentially one or more context identifiers, such that the backend then can such that it can eventually, it sounds like it doesn't do it right now, but can iterate over the array or the collection of.
Some endpoints do. Some, like for example, pattern deploy does, and there are other endpoints as well which do this right now. Which is to, if there is that query parameter, to basically that query parameter is extracted at the middleware level and put into that struct that we pass around each handler. So each handler does have access to that thing. So if the array is empty, so if nothing was passed at the query parameter, each handler would act the way it used to act before this PR, that is to act onto the current context. And if there is that particular thing, that it iterates over them and does it either sequentially or parallelly, depending upon the handler.
Okay, before we perpetuate that, that's probably a place where we want to insert a workflow engine for how it is that I think it's okay to have simple behavior today of something like, if there's multiple contexts present, execute across them in serial or parallel fashion, whatever is easiest. There'll be a nice insertion of kind of workflow and policy there about that'll allow users to get more specific about kind of about dependencies, like what thing to do first. So just as a note, like as you go to, it sounds like that there's inconsistent behavior across some of the APIs right now, but as you go to perpetuate the automation of invoking those operations across each specified cluster, bear that in mind, if you would. There's an opportunity to insert the workflow engine there.
Okay, noted.
One other question is, part of what you're highlighting right now is that for the APIs, these REST-based APIs that don't automatically invoke operations across every context that's specified, it would be, that's just a matter of time before that happens, right? Like, so there's no changes that we're looking for in the UI in the Meshery server clients, correct?
Actually, yes, we are, because both Meshery CTL and Meshery UI right now don't necessarily by default send what contexts to act upon. So right now, the UI does not send. If I clicked on deploy right now, and this should actually send the contexts into the query parameter, and it does not do that. The backend has a support for it. If it sends that particular those arrays of context. So basically, as I showed you, when I clicked on these things and I reloaded the page, the thing got overridden. So we need to persist these things when I click them from on the UI, and then we need to basically on each operation that has anything to do with the cluster. So for example, right now I selected these two things. Right now, if I reload the page, it doesn't persist it. It would be to the current context again. So if I selected these two things, then even if I reload the page, they should persist on the UI. First point. Second point, whenever I invoke an operation, for example, this pattern deploy operation, all these selected contexts should be passed into the query parameter. The backend has the support for it, and that operation would be applied on all the selected contexts. So yes, the UI needs some changes in that regard. That anything, so it would be a sweeping change across the way we call the endpoints. That is, whenever you are calling an endpoint that has anything to do with the cluster, make sure to insert that query parameter, which is the array of all these contexts that the user has selected, and make sure to persist them on the reload as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for that.
I just have a small question regarding the behavior when there is no selected context, in a sense, like, so obviously we can argue that why would there be such a state, but then let's say that there is a state that the user is asking us to perform a certain operation and he hasn't actually provided that. Then in that case, I think we should actually default to performing that operation on all the clusters, or shouldn't that what we should be doing? Or
right now the default is to perform that operation on the current context of your kube config, not all of the clusters. Yeah. So if the user doesn't specify, so you're saying like if this is what user says, like I haven't selected any context. Yeah. Okay, I think in that case, we should actually throw some kind of, instead of, maybe he forgot to unclick and then he clicked deploy, and now he has these 10 patterns, basically one pattern deployed on all of his clusters because he forgot. So I think this is more of a user mistake, that, hey, you didn't click anything. You should click something, at least one thing at least, or if you want to select all, maybe you can click on this thing. But if you don't select anything, that is more of the user's concern. So we should maybe throw some kind of error or something, that, hey, select, you haven't specified any context to act upon. So maybe you can specify that.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, the middleware that you referred to, is that applicable to GraphQL endpoints as well?
Everything, yeah.
Nice. Yep, there's the user-facing behavior here is unfortunate. It's it would be better if we didn't expose the context switcher, because it doesn't work.
In what sense does it not work?
It just lies to you. Like, it doesn't matter what you click or don't click. It's just going to execute.
You mean this thing, right?
No. I mean, yeah, I meant that. The context switcher there in the nav bar.
Okay. So you meant that if someone
we just need to tie this off, finish up the implementation of honoring and adhering to the selections that the user has made in the context switcher. Because
you mean for that scenario where nothing is selected, or like any scenario?
Any scenario. This is great.
Before applying any operation, the user doesn't have to go back here and select anything. Yeah, that's what I was also referring to. I mean, once you select something and then you whatever you do, that would be done in all the selected clusters.
Nice. Okay. Or no, what I meant was that it didn't seem obvious that it was adhering to, that the UI was honoring any of those selections. But maybe it is.
right now, it technically was not, because I had to select, the current context manually, but it can easily, that, like I said, you just need to add whatever
Yep.
whatever the
That makes
selected
sense.
is on.
Yep. So it's not a good, yep. So my statement still holds true. It's like it's totally dysfunctional and we shouldn't like release it and expose it to users. That's no dig on anyone's effort, or like you're just presenting state, point in time of the effort and how far it is and some of the behaviors around it. And it's looking pretty great. Like, and it sounds from your description, it sounds like, at least from Meshery UI's perspective, from this client's perspective, it's like, this close. There's only a handful of things to be done. Some of them can be, some of them are more urgent than others. Like one of them being, some of them being more about convenience. Like one of the issues right now is about state management with respect to, like, if you refresh your UI now, your browser, you'll see a blip in the number where it says 2. It'll probably go to 0 and then back to 2, I think. And it's like, wait, whoa. Yep. And so that's, it's an issue. It's a small issue and not, and so in terms of the priority of things to kind of work through, this is great. Like you brought the work that well, myself and Utkarsh and you, and there's a litany of others that have worked on these types of things. These are fundamental constructs as to the way that Meshery as a cloud native manager, as a management plane, its ability to invoke these operations using a visual UI across any number of clusters, and actually over time have control over, maybe maybe we begin to understand node groups within inside of a given cluster. You might have many nodes, you might have groups of nodes, or node pools rather. We might allow you to group multiple clusters together into like a group of clusters and invoke certain operations against different ones and things. Like, it's the fundamentals here, the building blocks that we have right now are just ripe for some tooling that you really won't find many other places. Like, so this is pretty darn neat.
Okay, one small thing that basically a nitpick in the UI. Basically, right now, as you can see, this operator configuration tab, and any operator configuration is specific to one cluster. So which cluster it is right now. So I have to click here, and so basically what I'm proposing is that this UI should change, and here you should maybe some kind of I don't know what's that called. When you have like a stack of cards that displays like that. So maybe there's some kind of an some kind of a tip here, which from where you can select which particular, basically on what cluster you want to see your operator configuration. So right now it is in my mini cube. So yeah, basically we need to have operator configuration per cluster and not just one singular, which is end of statement. Yeah.
So it's an operator configuration per cluster, per context?
Yeah. So for example, right now my current context is minikube. So if I switch on my Meshery operator, and if I hope I'm currently on my minikube context. So yeah, so my Meshery operator has started running here, and it says on. Now if I go to minikube 2, and first of all, now I've gotten to minikube 2 and it still says on. If I reload the page, then it says off. And then basically one of the behaviors is that I think Nitish knows better than I do. Whenever you reload the settings page, we start the operator by default. Is that the behavior, Nitish? Yeah. So we need to have a conversation on what that behavior as well. So when we want to start the operator, so right now, yeah, so the right now what you're seeing operator configuration, this is for minikube 2. Now if you ping mesh sync or operator or anything, that would be only for this particular thing, but it's not very obvious from the UI that for which cluster this operator configuration is being shown to you. Maybe you don't want your operator here, right? So maybe you say I don't want it here. And if you go back now, you don't know if you switched it off for which context. Now, basically, you get my point. My point is to have operator configuration per context per cluster, which is intuitive to the user, so he knows on this page that which particular cluster is he acting on whenever he clicks this toggle button or whenever he clicks on the chips. Any other questions?
So the fact that you choose the context in there and it's not showing which one it's selected, that's just like so like small like missing like implementation, right? Or
Wait a second.
like I like the drop down on the bottom left.
This one.
Like but why isn't it visible in the after the drop down disappears? Is there a reason? There.
Yeah, I get what you're trying to say. I don't know why it's not visible. I think it should have been.
But it really doesn't matter because the idea is to make this UI more consistent and have that kind of selection at like a more central place, right? Like clearer to the user. Okay, exactly. That's good.
What other questions do folks have or feedback?
Well, just I'm hoping this is useful about the context selector, the one that's on the bottom. I'm sorry, on top, like in the other, like I see that it's in multiple screens, right? I think that in order to allow the user not to make that mistake as to, okay, there's nothing selected. So I understand that like a context will be created based on the secret that's like in the in Meshery server, I think. But I was thinking that maybe like disallow the user from doing that. Maybe like when he deselects everything, like either all should be selected or the default one should be selected. But that's just my opinion. I know it's still a work in progress, so maybe that's not part of like what we want to do ultimately, right? So there should be invalid states. That's what I mean. Like if something is invalid, we shouldn't allow a UI user to leave that inconsistent state, because then we would need to handle that scenario in every place, in different handlers, in different processes, and I think it's just a bit. So that's just a suggestion. Does anyone have like any argument in favor or like in disfavor of that? I'm curious.
Yeah, agree, completely agree. Yeah, of course, we should not allow them to do anything stupid like basically applying something when nothing is selected. So yeah.
Yeah, that just made like simpler handling of like one less edge case to handle everywhere. But I don't know, maybe there's some other design that would serve that purpose and consider other aspects I'm missing.
Yeah, totally. There is, so this is no small topic. It is one, thought-provoking, two, central to every single interaction that the user has on the screen. It's all done in context, no pun intended, like in context of your contexts. What contexts are you looking at? Well, that really determines what you should be seeing, like for every single screen. There's different approaches to how this can be done. You can, the approach that we're taking, at least in the UX that we have, is that this is so central to your operational procedures by which you're, using Kubernetes, by which you're using a service mesh, by which you're running your workloads is central to and in context of Kubernetes, and the fact that like some of you, whether you're in large organizations or it's just you might have more than one cluster, like even if it's just a single node cluster. Clusters, there are many of them, and you find many of those in any organization. So the ability to manage your cluster sprawl, it's kind of a funny thing that's actually in part points to the need for a management plane. So if we take a step back and we say, you might have started using a container, you got yourself a bunch of containers. At one point, you started doing some serious things. You found the need for a container orchestrator. So you grabbed some Kubernetes, you grabbed the Kubernetes. Eventually, you're doing enough. Well, you need your production Kubernetes, your QA, your development. You need the one over in Europe and down in South Africa and the one over in the US to be multi-region and failover, and then across multi-cloud. And then along comes one of your teammates or the rest of your team, and Mario's organization comes in, they're disruptive, they want to do some things. So you want to give them some different clusters. Anyway, you find yourself with clusters sprawl. Like all the things that you have, they generally tend to sprawl. You also find that you get 20-something developers on a call like this, and they all need to blow up their own cluster. Oh, actually, they all need their own cluster. Oh, wow, wait a second. How many cluster, so my point of going through all that is to say that this is, front and center. This is why you need a higher level capability like Meshery, like a management plane to help you. It's not just a control plane, not just control of just. So the approach that we're taking, it needs to do what Augusta had hinted, as well as what Mario was saying. Mario was saying, hey, we should probably embrace the principle of don't let people shoot themselves in the foot. Don't let users shoot themselves in the foot if you can. Like it's never really a pleasant experience. Yes, should they, or no, they shouldn't be trying to execute an operation against 0 clusters. That's probably not going to work. Well, it might. There's some things that they can do that doesn't require a cluster, but if it requires a cluster, why would we let them do that? That hurts. Don't let them do that. Provide them with a pleasant experience. That design principle to me makes tons of sense. There are some cases where you do desire to allow users to situate themselves such that they can take the gun out of their holster, like cock back the hammer, and like just before they pull the trigger, you stop it. And so an example of something like that is, if I'll use Mario as an example again, if he's got a pattern, the pattern has an envoy filter in it. And as it turns out, the Meshery system that he's running maybe doesn't have that filter loaded. So is it valid for him to be in a situation in which he's got his gun out, he's got his hammer back, he's got this pattern that describes the fact that it's going to use a filter that's actually not present. So just before he clicks the deploy button, maybe he can't pull the trigger and click deploy because it's just going to fail, like that filter isn't present. So there's you can let them get close to you can let them work up to the point that they pull the trigger, I guess is what I'm trying to point out. And some of those concepts are already built into, some of you have built those concepts into Meshery already, exactly what I just described actually. There's a validation process that happens for patterns to figure out if, in fact, the underlying infrastructure that Meshery is in contact with would be, is capable of executing that pattern. There are other aspects to this that, like I was saying, that there's a couple of approaches to how it is that you would, how you would present the user experience for switching between contexts and clusters. How front and center do you make that? The way that we're doing it is, for now, is what we're saying is, this is a universal consideration that affects your experience as a user. So you've got this global nav bar, readily handy switcher between these contexts, because you're essentially looking at anything in this client in Meshery UI, anything that you're seeing, you're essentially seeing it through, right now anyway, through the lens of what you have selected. If you have 2 clusters selected, then you should see all the info summarized. If you're looking at a dashboard report or something, you should see all that info for all of them. And that design, and so when we need to go back and review each screen, like the Meshery operators, the system settings screen, we can either refactor or potentially start fresh in terms of how it is that you're managing what cluster you're trying to manage and whether or not that cluster has an operator and whether or not that operator is healthy. It needs to got to empower the user with the right controls. So just like this, there was a significant step taken here toward some robust multi-cluster support. We've got the right skeleton framework in place. And more than that, like there's some meat on the bones. There's a few places to go review. Ultimately, there's a spec that Navendu and I had given some thought to some time ago about Meshery CTL and what does it mean for the other Meshery client, not just Meshery UI, but Meshery CTL, to potentially be cognizant of the fact that there's multiple Kubernetes clusters that are in your environment and you might want to be provisioning against them or interacting against them. So there's a spec out there. It's linked to in Slack and it's in the community drive. It talks about those things. Anyway, I didn't mean to harangue everyone, but it's just, there's a lot to this and it becomes, you'll eventually find when this is done well, there'll be some users that are pretty tickled by the power of what they can accomplish across these clusters, across their service meshes, across their applications with just a click. So to Mario's point again, gosh, if it's just a click and you can affect that much infrastructure, maybe we shouldn't let you pull the trigger unless it's going to work. So, which again brings up my point about a workflow engine and the ability to insert like approvals actually as you go to invoke an operation. Should it be the case that Lee should have the pattern or the button that deletes clusters? That doesn't sound like a good idea to me. We should probably stop Lee from doing that, or at least have someone else review. So if you're unfamiliar, many of you are, but if you're unfamiliar, kind of the big milestones between the current version of Meshery that we have today and the 1.0, it's kind of two large architectural components: a workflow engine. Approvals can be inserted into any workflow step. That's a good example of what you'd use a workflow engine for. You use it for many other things. And a policy engine. You have policies for all kinds of things. I think people often think about authorization policies, permissions and things, but there's a lot of different types of policies that you might want to enforce. And if you're confused as to why do you need both a policy engine and a workflow engine, to help reinforce, to help clarify that a little bit, your policy engine, you really want to be able to express, you want an expressive language in which you can describe a particular desirable thing, a particular policy. And then you want ideally a distributed, highly integrated engine that does it's an evaluation engine. It takes your expressive policy and it says, of the things that you've described, is that true or is that false? Or evaluate it in a distributed nature, understanding that a lot of the things you might describe in that policy might be distributed themselves. So that's a whole challenge unto its own. So hence a policy engine. Now, when the policy passes or doesn't pass, what should you do about it? Well, that's when you come over and deal with those concerns inside of a workflow engine, because there's any number of things you would do. Anybody have any comments before we move on?
Any other questions for Ashish? Okay, I guess not. So moving on, we okay, yeah, we participate in a number of programs, and two recent programs that we are going to participate in is OpenForce and SheCodeAfrica. So there are I've listed down a couple of things that we need to look into right now, as of now. So Unnati, do you have any other updates apart from this? So one thing is we have to add this over here on our programs page. We have we also have to add a post for the event over here. And what I was thinking is the write-up which you had, that could be modified and added as a description in over here.
That Shebuel wrote a few days ago, I guess. That could be used as well for this list down it in the events tab. Maybe. Also, like we have mentors selected for OpenForce. One is Abhijay, he's here, Nikhil and Vedant. So these three people would be there at OpenForce guiding people regarding Layer5 open source projects. Also, we need to select certain projects that would be taking part in OpenForce, maybe certain repositories under Meshery, or and we have to look for the open issues as well. So if anyone is interested to volunteer for the same, I can share the doc and you can get started with it. So yeah. So yeah, that was update. Even I updated the website of OpenForce with the logo. So yeah, that is done. So
Awesome. OpenForce.tech, right?
yeah.
Love seeing some green.
So okay, I had just like green part is yet to be done, but we have updated the
Cool. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to harass you about that. I forgot. I just meant in general. I love seeing green. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I get why you chose the gray. Like, it works too. I mean, we have it for a reason, so it's pretty slick.
But I can update. Like, I can update this thing too. So yeah, and this will be done soon by tomorrow.
Unnati, that's pretty great. So Shebuel, I don't know that he's on, but has a draft blog post.
I suggested some changes and he did it. So like we are ready to like have it on our events tab. Means we can have it. So yeah.
Awesome. And then so you're tracking a list of mentors as well. Good. And it sounds like I suspect you still have kind of an open call out, not only for those that might want to participate as a mentor, but you also have, I suspect, a call out for just sort of refining, preparing areas of potential participation, kind of refining some issues or mini projects that participants might work on, chew on, over the month or so that their OpenForce is going on. So, for those that are on the call, if you're aware of some, it would be good to get those described, put up as issues. People can come along and engage. Unnati and others can help point out where to engage. Unnati, it's one of the things that to assist there, it would be appropriate to suggest to each of those that have volunteered to mentor that they themselves give consideration as to where they think they could help someone, or like what aspect of one of the projects they might be able to help support one of the participants in, and then based on that they can think about and describe a unit of work
Yeah, sure, I can do so. This could be done. So, yeah.
Nice. That's great. That's good.
Also, we have registrations of around 10,000 mentees under us. So, like, we need to work on issues as well because each participant needs to assign one issue. Like, this needs to be done. So, maybe this is a tough task.
Oh, is it okay? I guess I didn't. Is it an open hackathon? Like there's no whomever wants to come participates. It's not like they're named individuals and those named individuals are paired with mentors. That's not the format.
So, yeah, this is open for all. We
Okay.
have kept open for all, and like the registrations are touching heights.
Got you. Okay. Yeah. So that does, to your point, add a little pressure to make sure that there's any number of issues out there ready for people to come chew on them. So
Even I can make some, like even I'm working on certain issues right now. So maybe I can help making some
Yeah.
issues.
nice. Great.
So if you have any questions or any suggestions, I am open for it.
Okay. So for the open issues, we'll probably have to do a bug hunt on most of our projects, find out everything that needs to be fixed and start creating issues for that. We can probably track them, or I think make those labels, tags for the issues with OpenForce so that we can guide people to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although, yes. Although I will say this, that like if we end up creating an issue label and we actually propagate it across the 70 repos that we have, great. But if someone comes along and wants to work on the issue, like it doesn't, and you say, well, are you participating in OpenForce? No. Okay, well then no, you can't work on it. It's like, well, like that's not really how we want it to work. Because A, that doesn't feel good. B, maybe nobody else comes along to pick it up. And so like tracking a central list and how many have been generated and et cetera, and labeling them and stuff, is good, but be weary of the other side of that. Like,
If that happens, we could invite people to join OpenForce, right? In that case, like.
Yeah, unless like OpenForce has requirements that somebody needs to be in school or living in a specific country, or have pre-registered, or I don't know what those are. But Unnati, do you know?
I didn't hear the question properly.
Yeah. So like, I guess my point is
Requirements to join.
My point is like, hey, go write up some good issues. Make sure we got tons of good issues always. And especially with a couple of upcoming hackathons. And then beyond that, we're probably just hurting ourselves.
Of course.
Okay, we have Bami on the call, right? Bami, do you have any updates on SheCodeAfrica?
Hi everyone. So on SheCodeAfrica, there is still nothing yet as of now, because we are still waiting for SheCodeAfrica to get the mentees ready. They've not really picked mentees yet, but then chatting up with Ruth right now so we can sign up Layer5 as a participating organization. So we'll start from there. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, all right. So that's the update for SheCodeAfrica for now.
Okay. So does anyone have any other topics to discuss or any questions for today?
Do we have other? Oh, I guess we're about out of time anyway. Anybody have Bami? That's great. By the way, Bami, I did receive an email from Zanabar, if I remember her name correctly, or someone,
Okay.
or the Zanab, yep, Zanab. And so
Okay.
I'll get an email response back to her. I'll probably copy you as a liaison, and
All right.
so there's some progress, some momentum. So just for everyone that's kind of involved in between SheCodeAfrica and OpenForce, it's worth noting that SheCodeAfrica, and Bami, correct me if I mischaracterize this, but at least as it ran last year, was that the individual participants are named, if you will, or rather there's a kind of a qualification process or a selection process and then sort of a pairing process, I think, with sort of mentor to mentee and then kind of mentor to mentee to project and both approaches are great, are good approaches, but just it's good to be aware of that for those that are participating. So
yes, there's a selection process. Because the criteria for participating in contributing is that the person should be someone that is used to the used to open source. You're already like contributing to open source, and you have knowledge of this particular project you want to contribute to also. So those are the criteria for contributing, and you are really, really willing to dedicate your time to this particular duration of time, 2 months. So that's the basic selection process. And yes, I have had someone reached out that wants to participate as a mentor in Layer5, Raj. Raj reached out last week and said he would like to mentor. So yes, we have things going on with that. Yeah. So we are still looking for, let me just use this opportunity to make some call out again. We are still looking out for people to join us. The docs is available. You could just check it's a task you can help us with. You want to help with the organizing. There is the event, writing of docs for the event, looking out for mentors. And if you also want to be a mentor like Raj, you can always holler.
did Shebuel, I'm curious, did Shebuel jump in to assist anywhere?
For SheCodeAfrica, I'm not sure if he has, but I think he's going to do something. I'm not sure.
It's okay. Yeah, probably. If he hasn't, it's probably inevitable. It sounds like. So, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Cool. It looks like we're right at time. Did anyone have anything else today, or? Some of us are still green with envy over the Oculus. That's fine.
So, like, I want to add something here. So there is one person called Lucas from IOA Connect. So this person reached out to me for like automating like Layer5. They work on certain projects. I do not know. Maybe Lee could take over from here. That they automate communities. I don't know what exactly do they mean by this, but I guess Lee could take over from this. I could just send some of the messages that he pinged me. So I didn't understand, but yeah.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, there's a little bit of some automation that can be done within communities, help get people access to things, send them, make sure they got the right info in front of them. We don't want it to be too robotic, but yep, yeah, sure. Let's send them over. With
Yeah.
that, Deborah, anything else?
No, I think we're done for today. In case anyone has no other questions.
That's a wrap.
Thank
Bye
you
all.
all.
See you next time. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a lovely